thank you all for choosing the abundance panel today. And we've got some great experts, and I think it's such an important topic to discuss. So I'm just going to quickly say who we've got on the panel. I don't think we'll go through the whole rigmarole of tell us who you are. I think that'll come out as we discuss, I hope. So Bobby Allen from MUBI, who you've already heard from. Ben Luxford from the BFI. Allison Gardner from Glasgow Film and Glasgow Film Theatre, our home. And Jason Wood from Home in Manchester. I'm going to start by a terrifying news statistic that came out last week from our friends at ComScore, which is what Rentrack is now called, saying that they think UK theatrical releases this year will reach 900. And if you're doing the math, that's 16 films a week. So even if you saw 2 films a day, you could not see all the films being released in British cinemas. And just to open this up to everybody on here, because I think it's the good starting point for the discussion, is 900 theatrical releases. Is that breaking the system? And how do you each cope with that number?
We're all too shy.
No, you're not shy.
I mean, it's obviously it's a huge amount, and as you said, 16 per week. And I think there's various problems that it causes. As a programmer, I don't feel comfortable programming a film I haven't seen. So I try and watch everything, and I can't watch everything. So, you know, for audiences and for critics, there's a surplus of films available. And I think that what that also creates is it creates a kind of hierarchy or a pyramid where the higher profile films obviously exist at the top because they're likely to make the most money, and the more independent releases get pushed slower down to the bottom. I mean, the other problem that you have, and Allison and I were talking about this last night, is last week you had a situation where you had 2 very good foreign language horror films, Creeping and The Wailing, released on the same date. Now, even as a cinema with 5 screens, I had to choose one over the other. And it becomes very difficult because they're both films that are worthy of attention. And then you have the situation where in the press, I never thought I'd feel any sympathy for critics, but you have the situation in the press where they had to choose. So in some organisations, one film got reviewed and the other didn't, and in others it went the other way. It is difficult. It's really difficult.
We show about 600 films a year here at Glasgow Film, for which the projectionists thank me on a daily basis. Obviously, it's much easier with digital, but I concur with Jason. It is very difficult. I don't watch every film because I also have a team of people that I work with whose judgment I rely on because I'm a woman and not a man. Sorry, just throw that out there. So I don't need to watch every film that's shown at Glasgow Film through the Film Festival and GFT because obviously that would be too difficult on top of all the other things that I have to do. But I do make a judgment call in terms of curation, commitment, and then convincing people to come and see those films. So the 3 sort of C's that I think about, is it curated? Can I commit to it and make sure that audiences can do it, and then can I convince those audiences to come and see the film?
Okay. Ben, 900 films, are they all coming to you for support?
Not
all of them.
No, they're absolutely not. I mean, it's the interesting thing about, I've been, I manage the team who oversee, the administration of those funds, and they're quite historical funds and unfit for purpose in some instances. And what's interesting is that actually, even though in this age of abundance, the distribution fund in particular is the fund we have the lowest amount of applicants for. It's actually been in quite dramatic decline over the last few years. So, there's been a lot of, ahead of the new strategy coming out today, there's been a lot of consultation with the industry and a lot of soul searching about what is it that we need to or can achieve with these funds and how is it not satisfying the market, because the fund has always existed to enable films to really show greater ambition than they can do on their own. So it's about additional screens to find additional audiences and new audiences, but that actual ambition from the rights holders has declined, and whether that's because there's just not the opportunity now, because no matter how good you open, you know you're probably going to come off next screen. There's no such thing as a 2-week booking, or because actually that's not the intent of the rights holders. You know, there just isn't that ambition to achieve it. So we, you know, we're going to recalibrate the funds that you'll hear all about later on today. But it is interesting that we actually we can forecast across a year. It's very rare an application will come to us that comes out of nowhere that we didn't expect an application for, or we just don't know those filmmakers, or we don't know that film. Those are the ones we genuinely get excited about. We might approach them a bit tentatively, like, oh no, what's this? But you know, it's speaking to new people who've got that ambition to go to new audiences. I think we've been quite good over the last 18 months with giving a clarity of purpose to the funds and going out to the potential applicants to say genuinely what we are interested in. And maybe that's why we just haven't had the applications, because they're not interested in meeting our ambition. But no, it's quite bizarre. For all these 900 films, you know, the amount of distribution awards we're giving out has dramatically been in decline.
Okay. Is the budget for distribution support, has that changed?
No, I mean, we're very
change?
flexible on that. We've been very, you know, we've been working with applicants based on their needs. I mean, we take quite a hard line on what genuinely we need to be supporting. So there have been some very big films in the last 18 months that we haven't been involved in, where you'd probably usually think that we would be, but we took the decision that we just don't need to be in it. I mean, I don't want to say what they are because I don't think I can, but you can probably look at just the box office. Yes, of course. You can just look at the box office and see what those big breakout independent British films are, and we haven't been involved in them, but we feel they've absolutely met their potential anyway.
The market supported them.
The market supporting them. You know, the market has come to these films in a way that I don't think any funding intervention can really influence. So when we are deploying lottery funding into the releases of these films, we're really now looking for what is that difference that's being met. So rather than scale or ambition on a much wider spread, what is the strategy that's been employed throughout the release to actually get this film to new people? And that can be in those same venues that you play anyway, but it's not just money to take out more Guardian ads to get more people into the Curzon Soho. So, you know, I think there's probably a bit of criticism of us funding Daniel Blake, for example, but that film's still an absolute risk from the distributor. The distributor spent an enormous amount of money in releasing that film. There's no guarantees on it, but our funding we can follow to the pound as to where it went, what the difference it made in terms of employing the cultural ambassadors around the country to go out these communities. You know, it's nothing in that strategy that we funded would have come naturally for the distributor. It's all risk. It's all additional and potentially, in a commercial world, unnecessary. That's where we need to see our funding going. So we'll be much clearer about communicating that. But only certain distributors have that ambition. It takes the right film to do it. So when we're backing things now, you know, it's very rare that we'll be in something and we don't really know why we're in it. We're always, we're absolutely clear of the KPIs we're going after, the audiences we're going after, and what the change we're trying to make in the marketplace is with that. But it's still, the ambition isn't there in the way it was in 2004 from these distributors, but that's because the market isn't entirely there, because you can spend all that money, but you're not going to recoup it because you're coming off next week.
Yep. And Bobby, you spoke a bit about this earlier.
Yeah, well, I would, it's interesting from our perspective because actually these 900 films is the end of a long chain of abundance. And it really starts, you know, where we primarily acquire our films is in the major A-list film festivals. And, you know, we go to all of them, and if you sort of start the year roughly around Locarno, Venice, we went to Locarno, Venice, and Toronto to look at all of the films being launched there. And when we got back from Toronto, we had, I promise you, 50 links of films that had premiered in those festivals that are amazing films. I mean, every single one of those films I would love to show on MUBI and are worthy of exhibition and distribution in the cinemas here. So there is obviously, a problem here with too many films and too much abundance. But then I guess the question that we always ask ourselves, and we ask the rights holders, producers, sales agents, etc., is what is your ambition at this stage? And if your ambition is to connect the film to an audience, then at some point you probably have to look at digital distribution as an option. So this can work really nicely. And I know, I'm not contradicting what I said earlier about the theatrical experience, because I really, really believe in it. But it's not always appropriate for every single film. So, for example, earlier this year, something pops to mind is we had a documentary called Europe She Loves. This is a theatrical documentary that, in fact, premiered in the Berlin Film Festival, so already had that stamp of theatrical approval on it. And we ended up premiering it on MUBI for 30 days in the UK, in line with the Brexit vote. It was like our Brexit sort of special. And the film did incredibly well on MUBI. In fact, it was the most watched film in whatever that was, June. And we had lots of interesting programming that month as well. So the film was able to actually connect to an audience in that way. And it might have had something to do with the fact that it was all about sex, but I don't know. Yeah, it could be. But yeah, I just think so. I think, yeah, clearly there is a problem with too many films. It starts at the very beginning and it trickles down. But, my feeling is that, rights holders, producers need to make a decision at some stage about how much theatrical is enough.
God, you changed his tune quickly from this morning, isn't it? It didn't take long.
No, I'm not changing my tune at all. I really, it's because the choice is the combination of a choice between the producer and the people distributing or exhibiting the films. I'm not contradicting what I said at all. I think that these films, if Jason sees a film, my message is if Jason sees a film that he believes in, he should fight for that film and he should keep it on his screen, and he has to make that choice between that one, and he has to, as he said, he has to say no to some of the films. That's what that's about.
I mean, I think the point that Allison made as well is an important one. I mean, for my organisation, Jen Hall, who I work with, is here, and I've paid her £30 not to heckle. I mean, the problem of abundance in the cinemas is, if you think about the problem with audiences, I mean, in 1 week at home, we played 600 films as well since we opened. In 1 week, we had 22 different film titles planned across a week. Now, for an audience member, that's, and Johanna's talk this morning was excellent. For an audience member, how do they seek out those titles? But also from staffing issues. It all brings in another raft of problems. Server space, which sounds like a really simple thing. Storing all the films on the server, having the staff know exactly what's in what screen. This problem of abundance, it really creates lots of issues just from a logistical point of view and in terms of operating your building. And I don't see that the problem of abundance is going to go away. But I think there is another point that I wanted to make. I think also, and I like being called a curator. I remember once Philip Natchball introduced me to somebody as his film booker. And violence is never the answer. But at that moment, it felt like it was like when Mick Jagger introduced Charlie Watts as his drummer. But, I think the point of curating isn't just to choose what you're going to play, it's to choose what you do with it when you have it. So if people don't necessarily come on the one show or on the first week, do you just take it off for something else? Or do you try and show a little bit of resistance? And cinemas like mine, and I won't lump other people in with me because it's not fair, we have an added advantage in that we have subsidised. I think we have a responsibility to do that, and I think it's important that we continue to uphold that responsibility. But I think that also comes down to the choices of the first run films that you play. I mean, if you take the decision to show Fantastic Beasts, the likelihood is the involvement in the negotiations with that distributor means you are giving not just a commitment to a first week, but a fairly lengthy commitment. Now, that is going to restrict the amount of other films that you can bring in. So it is about that kind of choice process all the way through the run of a film.
Heck, maybe either of you can talk about an example of a film that you have fought for that maybe didn't do the numbers on the first weekend, but you knew could grow with a bit of word of mouth or just giving it a bit more space. Have there been examples that you've fought for recently? Because it is a fight, isn't it? to keep something
I mean,
on.
I can only think of a historic one, which is It's a Wonderful Life, which essentially pays for Nick Varley's very expensive holidays, as I pointed out to him. We put that film on and we created a sort of atmosphere around it. We had fake snow, we had mulled wine, we gave everybody a little mini mince pie from Marks and Spencer's, etc., etc. So now it's our biggest film of the year. It pays our electricity bill for the year. We take over something like 70 grand in 10 days or something, which is fantastic. And other people obviously do show it, but not obviously to the level of success that GFT does. And that's to do with the space, the place, this actual building, which has a place in people's hearts. We know that audience only comes once a year. We're trying to make them come more often. So we're hoping now that when they see our fantastically sexy new building, they'll be like, oh my God, this place is brilliant. We must come more often. So that's why one of the reasons we had to have it finished by this point. So really that sort of creating the space, the environment, the love of the building, the fact that people know that your organisation is a not-for-profit making educational charity, and I'm in the same position as Jason. I feel privileged to be subsidised in that way, and it gives you the opportunity to take chances. But we work very, very hard to commit to those films. I don't do holdovers. I commit to a film and I put it on and I keep it on. And that's in the printed brochure. And unless the distributor moves the film, for example, that is what happens. So committing to those films for 2 weeks, there's lots of things that just don't work. But I want to know why they don't work, what it is, and look at the patterns in terms of audience who's coming, who's not coming. And obviously we have a great marketing team who do a lot of data collection and look at those things. I'm a bit more sort of instinctual, and I'll just go in the foyer and stand and look and see who's coming. Is it old people? Is it, is it a granny-tastic film, as I like to call it? Or is it, something, you can tell just by looking at your audience. It's really important as a programmer that you're on the ground floor looking at the people coming in, and that gives you an insight as to what works, as well as the curation. I think curation is really important, and I think it's becoming a dying art. And I think it's really important that we don't say these people are gatekeepers as if we're stopping people seeing things. There's abundance, but there's lots of really bad films. I know nobody sets out to make a bad film, but they make a lot of bad films. There's lots of terrible films, and essentially you're sorting out the wheat from the chaff, and you're saying to the chaff, go away, here's the wheat, this is what we're going to give our audience.
We have, sorry, I was going to say, I totally agree with what you're saying, in that, being a digital company, we've had this tension in our business since the very beginning of the technologists who very much come from the sort of Palo Alto way of seeing things, where it's all about audience. It's like the content should always come from the community. And at a certain point, if you just follow that line all the way through, it's like cat videos on YouTube, right? So somewhere along the line, there's this very healthy tension between that and the curation. But I think over time what we've seen, and the point I want to make is that the curation is more important than ever, that you're right, it is about saying no to certain things.
I can't really take any moral high ground here because we did do a cat video festival event at Glasgow Film Festival one year, and it was our most popular thing.
I went to that, it was good.
It was really good.
But could we also argue that 600 films is too much for your audience? Is there a point that you...
Well, again, it comes back to commitment. I mean, I think the things that lots of people in the keynotes just spoke about, it's about building audiences for the future. And I think it's also about making sure that we're programming our cinemas to facilitate the needs and desires of all sectors of our community, which is why I think that the VFI Black Star initiative this year has been so important. And sometimes it's about adding to that huge amount of films that are showing by showing something that you know is going to have specific appeal, and it might be quite small appeal. I'm quite proud of the fact that I've worked with Karen Alexander on an initiative called, the film team has, called the Black Atlantic Cinema Club. And the audiences initially were quite small, and then they've built and they've built and they've built. And I think that sometimes it's about holding your nerve, and sometimes it's about doing something. I always like to cite Brian Eno a few years ago did the John Peel lecture. And Brian Eno is someone whose hairstyle I followed very closely. And Brian Eno spoke about the fact that it's very difficult. What we tend to be doing now in culture is ascribing it value only if it has commercial value. And I think that we have to be very careful to not only consider a cultural artefact in terms of the commercial value that it has, I think we also have to consider it in terms of the cultural value that it has. And they're not always the same thing. And I remember Mark Cosgrove, who's here, one of the first industry events I ever went to was a Europa Cinemas conference, and Mark sat on a panel, and he'd obviously rehearsed his speech because it was incredibly well delivered, bless him. But he spoke about needing to decide whether we want to be in the business of culture and the culture of business. And that's something that's really stood with me, because I think sometimes you do need to make those choices. And I think sometimes you can make a curatorial decision on a commercial ground, because there's nothing wrong with making money, and populism is not necessarily the enemy. But also I think you sometimes have to make a curatorial decision for cultural reasons, and I think that's also important. And as I said, I'm lucky. I have 5 screens, I have these subsidies. I'm in an easier position to do that. But I do also think that in some senses there's been a kind of abdication of duty in that regard. And you asked about a film that I was very, when we showed Rams, I mean, Rams 10 years ago would have been a no-brainer, a well-reviewed foreign language film from Iceland that had shown at festivals, been very well regarded. But I know that film didn't receive a great amount. Well, it received support in terms of the cinemas that showed it. But where it played, that film was a huge success. It played for 6 weeks. And also, it comes back to the other point I made. I remember Rams being reviewed in The Guardian and getting a 3-star review, and it was dealt with in 50 words. How does a film like that really have a chance if it's not being given a kind of equal footing as some of the other films that are released? I think that there needs to be equal weight given to these films, and that comes back to the problem of abundance. If there's so much, someone somewhere is having to decide what's going to get the word count in the national media that week, and it's a difficult choice to make. But I think we are, and people might disagree, I think we're slowly moving away from the point where we are so reliant on the reviews of leading national critics. I think they have less influence, and I think that's important, not because I want to see them have less influence, but I think it means that we're able to market and speak directly to our own audiences. And
Is
it
that
gives us
through
more power.
social media, through your own channels?
Yeah, I think through social media, I think through organisations like the BFI, I also think through programming collectives like Club de Femme, who are incredibly important, Come the Revolution. What I find really interesting about this year, Allison mentioned the point of gatekeepers. It's very easy when you're a curator to assume this kind of highfalutin role. I think it's brilliant the way that there are people that have come through, like Club de Femme, and these that have come through and are just kind of going out and doing it. And I think it's got a kind of punk aesthetic to it, which I think is brilliant. We showed Wonder Women as part of, we showed Born in Flames at home as part of the Wonder Women initiative. Old 16mm print, completely packed out. That had no attention. That was just done through social media channels. That for me was one of the greatest successes at home last year.
You've got to really engage your audiences, and ownership is really important. I mean, that's one of the key things at Glasgow Film is, even through the small things like the free retrospective that we do at Glasgow Film Festival, it's a way to get people to be part of something, a festival which they might not think's for them. It's about ownership is really key, and that will help those smaller niche titles because people trust your judgment. They will then take a chance.
Ben, can you talk a little bit about, did you guys support Rams, for instance? And maybe a little bit more about which films you support and why, because if there are this many, which choices are being made? And I know some of it's based on who's applying and who's not. But maybe a few examples from this year of things that you think BFI's made a difference in their distribution.
Sure. So when because the lottery funds are recoupable. So if a film does very, very well, the distributor will recoup their investment in the film and then will hopefully recoup some of ours. And I actually had a bit of a crisis where we invested in a few films last year and they all did really well and we just recouped straight away. And for me, it was a bit of, so I suddenly became very BFI overnight. I have a bit of a difficult relationship with success, where I'm much more suddenly in the Jason Mark Cosgrove way.
It's because you come from Curzon.
Yes, culture is much better. So we started seeing all this recoupment come back in, and I was like, okay, I think we're making
The wrong decisions
because we don't, actually. But you don't, none of us know anything, and it's that case of who would have seen a success like The Lobster coming. I could say that I did, but I didn't. You could say that you did. I'm pointing at Picture House, but I don't know if truly you knew that level of success was coming. So we started looking, and obviously the diversity standards came into play earlier in the year as well, and that has informed a lot of whether applications even progress or not. Is the intent of the applicant really there to match our diversity ambition as well or not? Some films this year that really stick out. I mean, Rams is a good example of a film that actually, for us, it was a case of why should we bother? Because there is an infrastructure, a very good theatrical infrastructure in the UK that can look after that film. And the ambition of the distributor wasn't anything that we probably hadn't seen before in terms of scale and size, but it was a film that we responded to very positively, that the applicant had set out a really good strategy about how they were going to reach new audiences, how they saw something in this that had the opportunity to speak to a younger audience that wasn't going to be influenced by reviews and traditional broadsheets, and that was quite exciting. And the fact that it went on demand as well was very positive for us to be able to show the industry how that a film success can exist on more than one platform. And importantly, that was a good lesson for the distributor as well, to really go through that process to understand that it wasn't just it wasn't going to kill any further revenue elsewhere. And Rams, for all the reasons you say why it's a no-brainer, on the other side it's an absolute no-brainer why you'd go nowhere near that film as well. There's only a certain amount of people traditionally who would hear about an Icelandic farming film and think,
elderly people,
I'm in.
Yeah.
But Soda Pictures with our funding, did an amazing campaign, re-energized the artwork, went out to crafting clubs, all these guerrilla pop-up knitting clubs across the country, and all of that kind of stuff. And then obviously the film became a word-of-mouth hit. Another film that really historically our funds would never have been involved in at all is Embrace of the Serpent. Again, some people on the panel might say why it's an absolute no-brainer. For me, it's a very long 3-hour, well, not quite 3 hours, but felt it, black and white, Colombian Odyssey that we just adored. But what was the distributor's ambition? How were they going to get it out there? And again, it's the difference of with a smaller distributor like that, like Peccadillo, who really needs the support of an infrastructure like that the BFI can bring to it. It's very different to giving some money to E1, for example. Yeah. So we were very proud to get behind them and allow that to become Peccadillo's biggest ever film. On the flip side, you've then got something like My Scientology film, which, the economy of these films is declining across the board. And Altitude, the distributor, genuinely didn't know the economy that they could live in with that film, because Louis Theroux wasn't a theatrical face. I mean, I'm sure you will know all of this, but he's so synonymous with television that what was going to get an audience to come out and see that film, and there are no TV rights available. They couldn't expose themselves to any risk, and the only way we thought we could make an impact to satisfy our measures of success in terms of finding new audiences and additional audiences was to do the satellite event, which Altitude genuinely wouldn't have been able to do without us. In then allowing that satellite event to happen, we then obviously find out that, they could have done it without us. They could have done it 10 times over without us. But without that opportunity that lottery brings for that strategy to be a failure, you don't know about the potentials of success. And there's been some really great results this year that have genuinely come out of nowhere, I think, for the industry. And I'm so pleased that we've been able to support them and get behind them. I think we'll come away from this year and look at films like Hunt for the Wilder People, Rams, Embrace the Serpent, Scientology films that may be skirted on the edges of festival success, but no means slam dunkers. They're not awards films, but they've absolutely gone to market and been driven there by audiences. And increasingly, that's where we're finding ourselves, is in a place where it's not about this traditional sector or satisfying more of the same audiences. We're going after new audiences. Increasingly, we're going after younger audiences. We're supporting a film this week called The Weekend, from a comedy. It's a comedy written by Kojo, the comedian, the London-based comedian, directed by Sheridan Lemires. It's the cast are Mandem on the Wall, who are a YouTube crew, and they've sold out all their R-screen bookings. Theatrical isn't their measure of success, because I saw the film and thought, actually, you don't need to do R-screen. You could sell this into cinemas easily. And they said, yeah, but we don't want to. What's the point? It's actually about, let's build our community, make them hungry for it through our screen, then go through onto iTunes immediately afterwards. For me, that's really exciting there's a lot of learnings the whole industry can get about, we talk about 900 films, but let's not forget about how there are all these audiences that actually aren't in our periphery, aren't in our venues, that are being satisfied by a huge swathe of all of these, by these other films. I was talking to View the other day about how they book Star City in Birmingham, and on weekends they can have up to 10 Bollywood titles screening to sell out audiences. 10 screens at a 26-screen cinema. And so that's not part of the problem. That's absolutely, that's based on a need, that's based on a market, but it's not a market that's generally in our conversation. So, digital has given this opportunity to all these new audiences now. I think it's good for lottery to start to influence that a bit more.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on what you were just saying about the View in Birmingham. And then they could show 10 screens of Bollywood. Because I think the word choice of this panel is abundance. And that to me has some positive connotations as well. It's not a deluge, it's not an avalanche, it's abundance, which can be quite good for audiences. So I'm wondering if you could all talk about what might be good about such abundance and how do we enable this huge pot of abundant films to reach audiences that want them that we might not be serving traditionally. So what's good?
We talked a little bit about this last night in terms of the award season problem. It's abundance in a good way, because there's lots of great titles, but we would like them in June and July, for example. Yeah. And so I don't quite understand why they're all, I know the mechanism of why they're all released in that period, but I'm just thinking that would probably should change in some way, and it would benefit both the films, it would benefit both the audience, and it would benefit the cinemas. So somebody change that, please, by next year. Thank you.
Anyone from the Oscars?
So that abundance is good in that way, but again, that means I'm saying no to 5 films that I might have shown
in June
or July to satisfy audiences like that, but I can't because there's already 10 that I'm already thinking that one's really good and that's really GFT and that's really going to satisfy my audience. So.
And then Rogue One will get in the mix too, and you won't even have screens for all the good Oscar films. Not you.
Not
here,
us.
But,
no. We would
in
never
other
go down
cinemas.
that.
Yeah.
Neither
it's a wonderful
Jason.
life.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful life, but then that's that is engaging new audiences for me, because that is a sort of cross-generational thing. So people come with their grannies, they bring their kids, they've never seen a black and white film. So for me, that's a sort of audience development, as well as a little bit of a cash cow to pay the electricity bill throughout the year. But that's sort of feels like it's like the panto.
Yeah.
It's the GFT panto.
But I think abundance is also important in a way that Ben touched on. I think now with the filmmaking process has become more democratic. So you have, again, we spoke about this last night, you have people from economically deprived backgrounds that are now making films about their lives. You have people from different racial backgrounds. I thought a very important film last year was The Hard Stop, the George Amposa film, which I know Ben was very supportive of. And I think it's important when we have these voices added to the amount of films. So I think that is a positive point of abundance. I think abundance, some of the abundance, cinemas like Watershed, Glasgow, other cinemas bring upon themselves, because it's not only just first run releases we're talking about wanting to showcase cinema in terms of its past, its present and its future. So as well as the first run films that we curate and we show, there's also the curated seasons that we do. Now these seasons can be incredibly important because they sometimes look at forgotten figures of filmmaking or underrepresented figures on screen, and again I think Black Star is a very good example of that. But they also looking at ways that technology have changed, or they look at subjects that are important in the way that we live our lives. One of the big things about home is we like to think that we have a very kind of playful and experimental approach to culture. We like to think we have a quite inclusive approach to culture. Home is a film, is a cinema, a gallery and a theatre. And I think that, you know, we create these seasons to look at the way that the world is changing. I mean, obviously this year we've had 2016 has got to be the worst ever fucking year in history.
He did swear,
So,
yes.
you know, not only you know, Trump, Brexit, the death of Bowie. I mean, it's just been a terrible year. But you know, we also begin to look in political terms at how the world is changing, and which is why I so soundly applaud the success of a film like I, Daniel Blake, because I think that that's a film, you know, which genuinely deals with an issue which I think we have to address, which is how people on benefits, the unemployed, the disabled are being roundly shafted by the Tory government. And I think that, you know, if more films come in the wake of something like our Daniel Blake, I'd be happy to have a problem trying to find space for those on the screen, because I think that this is something that as cultural institutions we do need to do. We do need to take part in a wider debate about what is happening in the world in which we live in. I'm just going to reach my cyanide tablet now, because I do have it here.
He's showing it to me.
I'm gonna
Bobby,
pop it.
abundance is a good
Yeah, well,
thing?
in the digital, well, it can be. In the digital world, we're a global platform, so you can subscribe to MUBI in countries like Turkey and Brazil and, you know, other developing countries, and particularly countries that have very high piracy problems, very high levels of piracy. And what we see, though, is we saw something sort of interesting, which is that, you know, at first piracy seemed like a very scary thing. Like, why would you subscribe? Why would you pay someone to give you the same service you can have for free online? But the answer is in that it's not the same service. And I think one of the keynotes talking about, you know, what is the film, you know, how the film plays its part in all of this. And the experience, obviously, of piracy is one of, you know, crappy image quality, crappy sound quality, etc. So that if you can provide a better than piracy experience, then actually the people are actually there willing to pay. So what the piracy does is it creates the desire to see the film. So it creates the consumer behavior. So people get used to this idea of like, oh, I can watch a film easily and conveniently in this way. And having that there allows you then to start to say, okay, but why don't you see a film like this in this environment, with this great app, with this great activity, and then of course following on, like, and also why don't you go see this film in the cinema as well? So yeah, it can actually be a benefit online. So yeah.
I mean, one other part, I think it's also interesting, I think this year we've kind of seen the return of repertory cinema as well. I mean, if you look at the Tarkovsky season, which Curzon curated, which was a huge success, you know, the reissue of In the Heat of the Night and Boys in the Hood, you know, we've seen films returning to screens. And again, that adds to the problem of abundance in a really good way. And I think that cinemas now, when they do, you know, GFTS, you know, when you do a 35mm screening and you bill it as a 35mm screening, you are bringing back this idea that you're having an experience that you can only have in a cinema. And I kind of think it's really important that we have to now, in this age, recognise that online and, you know, the theatrical cinema experience, they have to live in symbiosis. They have to. But I think seeing a film in an environment like this, in this beautiful auditorium, is very, very different to watching something online. I think people also get that. You know, I imagine going to see John Singleton talking about Boys in the Hood at BFI South Bank Screen One was a fantastic experience. And I think seeing a Tarkovsky film with 200 other people is a fantastic experience. And I don't think you can replicate that sitting with your mum and dad. I don't know why I use that example. You know,
Watching a Tarkovsky
Watching a little Tarkovsky on Christmas
you know,
Eve.
that is something that I think is more difficult to replicate. And I think that cinemas in some ways have begun to fight back in that they are bringing back kind of restorations and reissues, and they're finding that audiences are responding to them.
I'd also add to that the in defence of event cinema and one night onlys. I mean, not, you know, I'm still talking about film and cinema, but one of the most extraordinary screenings I went to this year was One More Time with Feeling, because you knew it was contained, the Nick Cave doc, and because you knew it was contained to that one night only. So there was, you know, a real palpable sense of engagement from the audience that they were experiencing and witnessing something very special and precious to them, and intimate as well, because the film is intimate, but because it wasn't that you could turn up and watch that film at 4 days in any cinema around the country. It was that everyone had made the effort to be there for that one night. These are the things that I think are exciting about what what the distribution of film means in this abundant landscape. You know, all these opportunities that are there now. When I think about growing up and having to wait, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks for a 35mm to finish its run in London before it was allowed out to the coast, and you know, that's not a thing anymore. I can see that film on the day it comes out. Well, now I live in London, but the 17-year-old me couldn't.
Yeah.
But you know, that's great, and I don't see that that's a problem with abundance. I think that's really exciting about the age we're in. I just add to that, though. I mean, I've got no idea what's going to happen in 18 months when all the VPFs finish. I mean, that's something I'm quite scared and excited about in terms of what will that mean for the landscape. Does that mean we go from 900 to 1800? Does that mean that actually weekly bookings cease entirely and it is much more about those one nights or one days or whatever? We'll see, because I think, you know, again, the industry is going to recalibrate in a way that we haven't quite got our heads around yet.
And to build on the Nick Cave is slightly different context maybe, because that was a theatrical film and it went to Venice Film Festival. But how do you all feel about the opera, the theater, the dance programs, making lots of money, but maybe kicking feature films off screens?
We have a policy. We do a certain amount of things that we feel, certainly in Scotland, because it's quite hard to get to London. It's expensive to travel there, for example. So the NT Live, we do that because that is, that's an access. Our numbers are going down across event cinema, which I think is fairly common across the whole sector. But we made a decision not to do the Met Opera, for example, because that's 2 slots or 3 slots out of a Saturday. Didn't think it was fair on the film distribution. It just didn't really sit very well with me, to be honest. So we chose what we would do. So it's NT Live and a couple of the other things that we feel, the Bolshoi, for example, ballet, which is quite difficult to get to, more as an access issue and a different engagement with a different audience. Barbara and Derek, I like to call them.
And do they come back and see films once they've had a lovely night at the Bolshoi here?
Probably not. Some of them, yes, but not in big enough numbers, I think, for me.
Okay.
For me, that's my personal experience, I think.
And what at home do you?
I think I might have taken the cyanide tablet too quickly. I agree with Allison. I'm not a big fan of. We have a limited offer, but you know, we're quite different. We have our own theatre. So if you're going to come and see a play, come and see one of our own productions, which is brilliant. But I kind of, there was a period when I was at Curzon where showing films was actually the alternative to alternative content. And I think that we kind of reached a saturation point. I'd rather use one of those slots to show a film that ordinarily might not get a showing.
Right. A Tarkovsky or something else? Or?
Yeah, or maybe something with Seth Rogen in it, you know, a big budget. Maybe Star Wars 1-1. I'll do a Discover Tuesdays on it or something.
Bobby mentioned before in his keynote that he thinks, you know, watching films online will lead to sort of helping the whole ecosystem. Are you agreeing that do you agree that people who are watching films on MUBI or Netflix or Sky On Demand are then also going to the cinema more? Is it film is part of their life, or are they staying at home watching because it's easier and cheaper?
I mean, I don't know. I never watch anything online, so I'm like not a good example. My children do. My teenagers. I say not really children anymore, but my teenagers will, and it will encourage them, because I will make them go and look at things like, say, Short Term 12, which is a film that I really liked and wanted, and it's now one of my daughter's favourite films. So I will encourage them to seek online things that I know are no longer in the cinema, but I know really deserve to be seen by that teenage audience, and that works. And then hopefully they will then come to more interesting stuff. But I think our audiences here at Glasgow Film are growing, so we're in a very privileged position. We work really hard to engage with different communities, so we look at each niche film and then try and find an interesting audience for it. But I think, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure, sorry, I'm just going to stop it there.
Okay.
I'm not sure if people are driven more by the back catalogue of Tarkovsky to come and see them here. So.
I think it's nice that it's there. I mean, again, given that there's only so many screening slots, if somebody comes to see a film and then want to go to MUBI or the BFI Player or the Curzon and discover other works by that director, I think that's a good thing. I think if it leads to a kind of education and a kind of increased cinephilia, then I think that's good. And I think that, I hate to keep praising the BFI, but I do know they've got this announcement later, so I'm going to. I think the BFI have been quite smart in the way that they've positioned their iPlayer. There is some content that is very difficult to access to show in a cinema screen. So if the other alternative is to not have it seen at all, I think it's preferable to have it available online. I'm a team player.
We're doing a Lav Diaz retrospective now, and actually
You need your sofa for that.
You need it, exactly. And we had actually planned it before he won the Golden Lion. We ended up launching it that same week. But Mark Cosgrove just came up to me and said, he really wants to show some Lav Diaz. So I don't know, maybe it is maybe Mark's just crazy. But anyways, I do hope it does have this educational effect where, if enough people are able to experience these films in a more comfortable environment or less effortful and, putting in less effort, that, they might be willing then to make the effort to go out and see the film in the cinema.
Bobby, you and I spoke just briefly about The Happiest Day in the Life of Olli Mäki, which is this wonderful Finnish feature film that won Uncertain Regard in Cannes this year. Again, maybe a tough sell, Finnish language, black and white.
Yeah.
And even just entering this crazy world of theatrical releasing. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about why it's the right time for MUBI to do this and how you would plan to launch it theatrically, and then when it would go online to the service, and how that's all going to work.
Yeah, well, first of all, when we do things like this, we're kind of trying something out and seeing what sticks to a certain extent. So, yes, it is actually terrifying now. So, we went to Cannes, super excited about our theatrical strategy. And, in fact, we saw Olli Mäki at the first screening and started negotiating to buy it right away. And in that process, other people got involved, including Netflix, who probably made a much higher offer than we did. But our passion really came through, and the filmmakers wanted us to have the film because they were confident that we would treat it with a great amount of respect, and of course, which we will do. But then, and then it won Uncertain Regard, and then it won Zurich, and then it was invited to every film festival around the world. And then there's a moment where you sit there and you go, oh my God, it's a black and white Finnish film. How are we going to deal with this? But in that case, I think, first of all, we're very, very lucky because the film does have, it's such a good film. It has so much momentum behind it that even in the most traditional sense, the film has a very, very good shot, at connecting with an audience. So how we approach it is very much, like any traditional distributor does. We're designing a campaign both in the UK and the US, and we will completely respect the theatrical window. So, the idea is to, release the film, do all the things that you do at the release and more because of our expertise in digital marketing and digital distribution. We will activate those communication channels that we're using every single day super efficiently, to bring subscribers to MUBI and have them stay there. We'll use that to drive audience into the cinema. And then when the theatrical run is finished, we'll show the film on MUBI for 30 days, because the MUBI model, it's very short term, just a 30-day window. And then we'll work the film through all the other platforms, iTunes, Amazon, et cetera, and hopefully, if we're very lucky, have a TV sale, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the idea. And of course, there's tremendous value for us and the filmmakers in that model. As I said, we're going to work very specifically on that film. By the way, this is not a volume business for us. We're releasing 6 films a year is our goal, and we will do the best possible theatrical we can for the film. But then afterwards, of course, we will have this expertise to bring the film through all the digital platforms, in a very specific and targeted way. So that's the strategy.
And the sort of strategy for you, is it an end goal to get more subscribers to MUBI?
I was going to say yes. So of course everything we do does lead back to our it's a subscriber business. But again, we think that the message that people receive in the cinema when they see the MUBI brand is that you can see amazing films like this in the cinema and online. So we really, in a way, it's like a brand filter or a brand activity for us, as well as, you know, a distribution business. So we think that, yeah, that will help bolster our brand by, you know, being in the conversation in the theatrical environment.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I think it'd be a great time to open up for some questions.
Hello. So, speaking as an independent documentary filmmaker whose work will and always will be described as niche, it's very easy to get lost in this era of abundance. And BFI Southbank, GFT and Home have all found space to show the films in their cinemas, which I want to commend them for, not only because I make a huge effort to make them look good on the big screen and sound good, but also because it helps make them more visible. So, for example, the screening at the GFT meant a journalist wrote a piece about it, and that sort of visibility helps me continue to make films which are niche. But I wonder in this era of abundance, if that's going to become increasingly difficult to do that for smaller filmmakers.
Well, I think as audiences, you know, as institutions, I think what we look to do is to build up trust amongst our audiences. And I'm like Allison, I like walking around the building, I like talking to people about what they see. I normally have to have some sort of minder so I don't get assaulted. But I like that dialogue with people. And as I said, what we tend to find is not everybody's going to like what we put on, but there is a sense of trust. And I think that what we have at home, and a lot of my compatriot cinemas have it, is audiences seem to like this idea of a sense of discovery. And I think they will come and watch something that they may know very little about. And I think they will take a chance on it. And this was one of the panel debates last year, is I think that one of the other reasons that they take a chance on it is outside of London, ticket prices are much more affordable. And I think, you know, that is something else which is continually being raised. You know, if you're charging a ticket price which is within the realms of somebody that doesn't have a six-figure salary, it makes it more attractive for somebody to take a chance on that. So I think it's really important that cinemas and cultural institutions price themselves fairly. But as I said, you know, there is this sense of trust that builds up, and with Home, what we've done, we've tried to build quite a successful platform for first-time, second-time filmmakers, not just from the north and the northwest, so that there is the support of local artists, but we have tried to build up this kind of network of support for experimental films. And we showed a film recently by Joe Lawler and Christine Malloy called Further Beyond, which is one of my favourite films of last year. And I was really worried if there would be an audience. I mean, I really like their films. They made Mr. John and they made Helen, but they're not particularly well known. But because we had these other documentary screenings by similar films, you know, we sold out the screen. You know, and the other great thing about the current climate that we find ourselves in, again with the support of the BFI, there is a network of us now. You know, if I do a screening which is successful, I'll tell Allison, I'll tell Mark, I'll tell Joan, you know, and other programmers that I haven't mentioned. And it goes the other way. You know, Mark will tell me, look, we did this, you might want to think about doing this. And I kind of think that there is a sense of taking the power back, which I think does come back to filmmakers and maybe give them more of an opportunity. You know, not just feature-length films, we try and showcase a lot of short films. Again, this does add to the problem of abundance, and you know. But you know, if somebody makes something, the idea is you try and support it on a screen. And as I said, I recognise I'm in a privileged position that I can do that, but it's something that I think is really important to do.
But yeah, I think you're right. I think it will get harder to find that editorial space.
Thanks, Ben.
Sylvia Harvey, Sheffield. Thank you very much to all of you. History is written by the victors, and films are selected by curators. In the old days of the visual arts, you could look at 50 paintings in less than 50 minutes. You can't look at 50 films in less than 50 minutes. So the problem of selection is very great. And I think I'm right in saying that by and large, the size of the audience is still related to the size of the marketing budget. So what we're talking about here today is a very, very precious sector, whether it's online or offline. And I would like to hear the people on the panel speak a bit more about the counterfactual of the problem being not so much abundance as scarcity. I come to Glasgow and I find the Glasgow Film Theatre showing the same films that are being shown at the Independent Cinema in Sheffield. So there is a scarcity issue, although it's terrific to know that some curators are looking at films before they show them, and the audience build a trust with the curator, you know. Anyway, please could you address the scarcity issue as well as the abundance? And secondly, I've heard the online person speak about complementarity with offline, with real space and real time. But I haven't heard the real space and real time people, the cinema people, talk about their complementarity with online. And it seems to me that we need to be talking more about that.
Allison.
You mentioned it, your teenage daughters.
Well, I think it's worth saying you've both got online components to your
we have
to your offers.
player. Yeah, we have a Glasgow film player, which is essentially a curated video-on-demand programme that we work with. I have to say we've not really kept our eye on it over the last couple of months because we've been really busy with the building work, and being a small team, there's only so many things we can do. I wasn't quite sure about the scarcity thing that you were talking about, in the sense of the same films are showing at Sheffield that are showing at Glasgow. I mean, that's down to the fact that there's a certain amount of films that we all will show that are, you know, the money-making films, the 2-week, the Nocturnal Animals, for example, or I can't even remember what we've got on just now because I'm working on January and February. But those sort of films, there's certain things. But the more interesting thing is the sort of mini-seasons that are in each, I think, of our venues. Watershed does things that are different from Home. GFT does things that are different from Filmhouse. Filmhouse curates programmes that we will then take on tour. So there's lots of working together, collaborative working together, which is really important in our sector, and that sharing of information. So we all do things that are a little bit different, but we actually share a lot of the same ethos in terms of how we put things together. In terms of the online and offline, apart from the GFT player, I don't really go online very often to do things unless I'm watching screeners for the festival. I have to say it's not really my strong point. I still ask for, is there a DVD of that? And everybody goes, no, we don't do that anymore. So yeah, I'm still old school, a little bit old school. I have to say, all my team are all up front and they all know how to do all this. I'm very, how do you do that thing with the thing that is a thing? And everybody goes, we'll sort it, Allison, just, that's fine. So yeah.
But you're not really pushing most of your programs online? Or
No, we're pushing some of them in terms of on the player. It's to do with time, rights, whether people want that. We do work with Curzon, for example. We will show the films online and on the player as well. So that we took that step. We don't feel it's the same. We don't feel it's cannibalising our audience in terms of the coming to the cinema. So, but we're trying to put more interesting things on the player, a little bit more curated rather than just the films that we have in the cinema. Yeah. So we bought films, we put them on the player, and they were really. We'd only shown them once at a festival, for example, and then they were on the player for a long time, and they worked quite well.
Yeah. I mean, that was. That was the point I was making initially, that I do think there is the opportunity for these films to have a life online. And, you know, part of that model that we have is when we acquire those films that are really fresh from the festival films, we do try to give them some theatrical exposure, but often that's like a Q&A screening or something like that. But in the end of the day, it's like if we don't have access to the screens, then I'm just delighted if we can connect those films to an audience and people can get a chance to see them.
We think of the player as GFT4, if you like. It's an extra cinema. And also because geographically Scotland's a more difficult country, so not everybody can get to the GFT to watch films, so we want them to see our curated programme online as well.
Yeah. And can somebody, say, in New York watch a GFT player?
No, it's
geo-blocked for UK or?
UK, yeah. Okay. Until we're a separate country, of course.
Okay, well, yeah. Watch this space.
You might be getting a lot of job applications. Well, I think I mentioned that, you know, we very much see the relationship between physical theatrical and online as having to be symbiotic. I mean, the one thing I will say about Home was we're a relatively new venue. We only opened in May 2015. So, you know, we're still developing our digital activities. We are starting to film and create our own content, which at some point we will be looking to distribute to other venues, and that's all part. I think what we're all looking to do, I think what everybody in this room is looking to do, is to be part of a shared experience and be part of a future kind of film culture which is vibrant and diverse. And I think that sharing information, sharing content can only build towards that. So, you know, that's what we're looking to do. But we are looking to look at how we can create more online content. I mean, if you have a physical film director in a country, and I know that Ben and we've spoken a little bit about kind of event cinema, I think we also should talk about how important it is to offer Q&As, but you can only get a direct, and the other thing which I think is important is the way that the dominance of London is slowly coming to be eroded, which is something I'm quite passionate about, and now because of a collective strength outside of London, distributors are sending filmmakers to visit cinemas that are further afield, but obviously, one person can only be in one place at one time, so I'd like to see a future relationship where somebody does a Q&A here, or at the film house, or at Watershed, or showroom, and we can't get that director, and we're fine with that. Actually, we're really annoyed, but we keep quiet. And we take their filmed interview. I mean, I think that's an interesting way that digital content could work. Cosgrove.
Oh, Cosgrove has a question.
Cosgrove.
Or a comment.
I thought Wendy was chairing, Jason.
Sorry.
Just to sort of pick up on that point, Mark Cosgrove from Watershed in Bristol.
Cosgrove.
Is that we all now, as venues, have websites, have a social media presence. We all use that to communicate with audiences, not just in the UK, but actually globally as well. In the kind of podcasts that everybody does, it's actually ways in which I think we're sort of doing what Bobby's talking about with MUBI, which is, that curatorial voice is going out and engaging audiences with what it is, the content that we've got. And also that content might just be about film culture in general. And it also allows, because the problem with the word curator can be what Waldemar Janaszek describes in the art world, which is this tyranny of the curator. Whereas what cinema's doing, picking up on earlier discussions in the first session, is that it allows a plurality of voices to come through as well. So that I think you'll find if you go to any sort of independent cinema, you'll have a kind of range of voices that are coming through talking about, in our neck of the woods, it's Come the Revolution, it's Cinema Rediscovered, there's a big Southwest Silence community, so there's all these communities that you begin to tap into through the online, through the digital space, which kind of talks to Don's point as well about the sort of regional theatre model, going out and talking to communities. So in fact that it sort of expands the opportunities for audience engagement, which then leads to quite specific high attendances on specific things in particular venues that become known. I mean, our own instance I think about is Slapstick Festival, which started in a conversation about, you don't show many silent films. 10 years ago, put on some silent films, said, I want to see it developmental. 10 years later, it sells out an 1,800 seat concert hall for, silent film with live music. And then you've seen that sort of growth, but you've then seen that growth nationally, with Hipfest and Boness and, a range of different stuff. So, these things are both specific community-based and place-based, also relates to the online, but also strategically, I think, is networked through the UK. I don't know if there's a question there, but...
Does anybody want to respond to Mark's comments?
No, I think it's interesting the way people become known for things. Obviously, Sheffield with the Documentary Film Festival. I think Manchester is becoming known for the great festival that Jet Hall's involved with, Manchester Animation Festival. And it's great that we kind of create our own identities, and it's also great when that information is kind of shared. I'm very lucky. I get to go to the Cinema Rediscovered in Bologna, which is paradise. And I think what Mark's done by replicating that in Bristol is brilliant. And I think it's good to be known for distinctive things, and I think that is what gives us our voices and our sense of uniqueness.
I think it would be odd. I think that when we're talking about abundance, I was just trying to imagine a world without any independent cinemas, what the world would like. There wouldn't be a problem of abundance because there'd only be Star Wars and the Fantastic Beasts. There wouldn't be an abundance. So really, without us, without the independent cinemas and all the people who do film societies and everything, that we wouldn't be having this problem. There wouldn't be the same amount of films made. So we are essential, important, and you need us. We need to keep telling people that.
I want to thank our panelists, and we're all going to walk en masse to lunch to queue up for something together. So please, there'll be volunteers guiding us on how to get to lunch, but thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Wendy.